Hi, I'm Hayley Boyd. I'm the promotional director and DJ at WLRA at Lewis University. Today, I'm here with team member John Goehrke of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Hayley. It's great to meet you.
Thank you, you too. So can you tell us what your job is there and what you do?
Yeah, so I am the Director of Guest Experience, which essentially means it's my job every day, and my great team, it's our job every day to think about the experience for any visitor who walks into this building. And that could be a student, it could be a family, it could be a retiree, it could be a group. Anyone who walks into our building, we treat them as a learner, as somebody who wants to really learn about the history of rock and roll, think about the power that rock and roll music has had. And so we do that through programs, different educational programs, and other kind of forms of engagement. And pre-pandemic, we would do that to over 500,000 visitors every single year from all over the world. Obviously, things are a little bit differently right now, but even with a lower attendance, we still see it as a great opportunity to create really meaningful, deep experiences for all of our visitors.
That's awesome. That seems like that would be a really rewarding job.
It is. I've been here 15 years. I started here right out of college and, kind of grew into the position I'm in right now. But it's the greatest gig. I love it. I get to meet some really amazing people, both, people who I work with, visitors who come into the building, and in many cases, touring musicians and some of our Rock Hall inductees. And they get to share some great stories with our fans as well. So it really is, we're the only Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the entire world, and right here in Cleveland, Ohio. So it's a really special place to work. And even right now, where I think people are looking for maybe a sense of normalcy, certainly our experience is different because we have all these heightened safety measures and precautions, but we really want to give people a sense that when they come here, they can kind of be transported into rock and roll history.
That's pretty cool. And along with that, I know that you have, it's all dedicated to like the inductees and how, the fans get to choose their favorite musicians and all that stuff. And that's kind of something that I've always been really curious about, kind of that nomination to inductee process. So how are like each class of nominees chosen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a lengthy process, but I'll kind of summarize it as this. Artists become eligible for even consideration 25 years after the release of their first record. So that's why, like this year, the notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, in his very first year of eligibility, 25 years from his debut record, Ready to Die, he was nominated, and then he got the votes, and he's going to be inducted in the class of 2020 here in a few months. 25 years, you become eligible. There is a nominating committee that's comprised of, historians, scholars, journalists, record label executives, musicians. It's their job every year, usually in the fall, to get together and say, okay, well, there are thousands of eligible artists. Who should we consider for nomination this year? And after the course of like a long debated day, and I love to be a fly in the wall in that room, they come up with the ballot. And that ballot is usually anywhere from 15 to 20 artists. That ballot gets mailed out to over 1,000 voters. And the voters, it's all living inductees, which is very cool. So like Joan Jett gets a vote, and Mick Jagger gets a vote, and Madonna gets a vote. And so it's, that's a really, I think, special part of it. Chuck D from Public Enemy gets a vote. The voters vote. There is a fan vote, which you were alluding to. We allow fans across the world to vote as often as they want. The fan ballot essentially becomes one of those 1,000 ballots. So there is a cool fan element, but the fans don't like determine outright who gets inducted. And then quite simply, whoever gets the most votes, usually 5 to 7 performers, they get inducted every single year. There's some other categories of non-performers for songwriters and producers, but I think the most of what people think about with that process is the performers.
That's really cool, actually. And I just actually thought of something. Is there a way that the general public could possibly start like a petition to nominate a musician?
Yeah, so we get a lot of requests, almost every single day of people who want to see their favorite band inducted. I mean, that's part of music. Music is so meaningful because it is so personal. It's the soundtrack to your life. And my soundtrack is going to be a little bit different than your soundtrack, which is different than my buddy's soundtrack, different than my parents' soundtrack. It's fun to have some shared memories. That's part of the power of rock and roll as well. But all of us also have these individual experiences. So if you are a big, Jethro Tull fan, not yet inducted, or a big Pat Benatar fan, as I am, or a big, Luther Vandross fan, as I also am, people who are eligible, but just haven't been nominated yet, and that's the key word because there's no expiration date. Yeah, there's no formal process to like petition, but certainly, a lot of people will reach out or send letters to our nominating committee, or, to our foundation in New York City. A lot of times you'll see, and again, this is not always like a foolproof way to do it, but sometimes naturally, if maybe there's like a documentary about an artist, particularly one who maybe was sort of maybe left behind a little bit in history books, and this documentary like sheds light on an artist, or like a contemporary performer comes out and talks about how much, I remember when Hall & Oates got inducted a number of years ago, and I'm a big Hall & Oates fan. For a while, they kind of became, I won't say the butt of jokes, but people kind of lost the thread of their influence. They're a very influential band. People just didn't realize it. And then like right when Justin Timberlake was breaking out as a solo artist and was just, selling tens of millions of records, Justin talked about what an influence Hall & Oates had as a songwriter, as a singer, as somebody who thinks about arranging music. And it just sort of put them into a different light. And people are like, oh yeah, Hall & Oates, they're pretty dope. So I think you see that too. It's these sort of things come, they're a little cyclical a little bit. It's why there's no expiration date. You become eligible after 25 years, but you never become uneligible, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So would you think that more of the older rock stars that maybe a lot of younger people don't really know about become more popular and are more recognized in the Hall of Fame when a more contemporary artist mentions how they've had an influence on them?
I mean, I think, anytime somebody who is more contemporary, who has a more active spotlight on them and has a more active fan base, if Lady Gaga comes out and starts talking about how much she loves David Bowie, and David Bowie has a big fan base, don't get me wrong, but now all the Gaga's fans are like, whoa, I got to learn about David Bowie, or Taylor Swift or Beyonce, or fill in the blank, anybody with this huge fan base. It's one that they have a platform, and if they choose to talk about somebody who is a really Beyonce's talking a lot about Nina Simone, and Nina Simone's a really influential figure, key in the civil rights movement, is featured prominently in our brand new exhibit. It's Been Said All Along. It's a whole exhibit about rock and roll as social protest, both from the 30s, 40s, 50s to like through today, which obviously in today's climate is a super important and relevant topic. So when Beyonce talks about Nina Simone, suddenly a whole new fan base might be turned on to this performer. And I love when artists do that. And those are the kinds of, we try and make those connections all the time as we're teaching about, if you like Bruno Mars, well, you should definitely learn about James Brown, or Jackie Wilson. And vice versa. If you're a big fan of Freddie Mercury and Queen, well, then you should learn about Janelle Monáe or Gaga, or somebody of that nature.
That's awesome. That seems like, I know you said it's kind of an informal process with inducting and nominating and all that, but it seems pretty interesting. I think that's really cool.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah, and it's not without its controversies because people are so passionate about it. And our one thing I'll say is I love our definition of rock and roll. It is expansive, it is inclusive, and that to us, rock and roll isn't what you look like. It's not defined by what instruments you play. And I think for some people who might maybe just either have a more narrow experience with music, or quite frankly, a narrow definition of what rock and roll should be. They think of rock and roll as Zeppelin and Floyd and the Beatles and the Stones, and again, great groups. I love those groups, but that's only one slice of rock and roll. You can't tell the story of rock and roll and not talk about, Whitney Houston, who's being inducted this year. So our definition includes hip hop, includes funk, dance, pop music, disco, prog rock, you name it, punk rock. It's all these branches of rock and roll, hip hop, if I didn't mention that. And that's a really important, I love working in a place that celebrates such an inclusive spirit. It's really important.
Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned your definition of rock and roll, and how it can kind of vary between different people. I also saw on the Rock Hall's website that their mission statement is to engage, teach, and inspire through the power of rock and roll. So how does the Rock Hall fulfill that statement?
That's a great question. And yeah, we're very proud of that mission statement. We all kind of live and breathe it every day. Those three words are key: engage, teach, and inspire. So engage is every touch point that a fan of music has with us. That could be on site, that could be through our social channels, that can be through their experiences in the fan vote. It could be through even them hearing this interview on your college radio station. It's, we take it very seriously and we have a lot of fun doing it, but we take it seriously that we're trying to create meaningful, deep moments of engagement. Even if I only have 5 minutes with somebody, I want to find a way to make a connection through music. And ways we do that is through teaching. Education is vital. It's the lifeblood of what we do every single day. And that's like both the general education, that if you came through the museum and you knew about maybe a general summary of rock and roll, but you couldn't go that deep. Well, after coming here for a couple hours, you're going to learn a ton. If you already know a lot and you're a self-proclaimed expert on rock and roll history, we still want you to come away learning more. And then most importantly, or maybe as important, if you're a student, we want to make sure we find ways for teachers and schools to use rock and roll in their classroom. And that happens both by schools visiting us. Again, not so much right now, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but school group visits is a huge part of our visitation every year. We also, which is really thriving right now, we have an online educational portal called Rock Hall EDU. It's all teachers out there or students who want to learn more or share what maybe their parents who are doing homeschooling or whatever. Rock Hall EDU is a free platform where you can get lesson plans, activities, writing prompts, different kinds of exercises, curated playlist, exclusive video content, all for free through our education platform. And we're very proud of that. So that, engage, teach, and inspire. And I think the inspiration comes a lot from the artifacts and from the different experiences that you see when you come into this museum. When you watch our Power of Rock experience, it's this whole interactive, high-tech theater, and it feels like you're at a Rock Hall induction ceremony. So that inspires you to feel the power of rock and roll. Or I mentioned our new exhibit. It's been said all along. We hope you leave that exhibit feeling inspired, realizing that even when times seem really hard, and even when people are being, discriminated against, and there's massive, problems with racism and sexism and homophobia. We hope that when you see that exhibit, you realize that rock and roll is not just to entertain us. It does entertain us, but it's more than that. It's to build bridges. It's to strengthen those who maybe don't have a voice. It's to help those who don't have a voice. And those are some of those stories that we want to make sure we share and teach. And maybe you come to our goal would be, you come to the Rock Hall with, unfortunately, maybe a little bit of a closed mind about certain things, and you leave with just a little bit of a more open mind. And that's would be like our dream for anyone who walks into this building.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to not only, learn stuff in person, but you can also do this online, especially in times like now, because I know some people aren't really comfortable with traveling.
Yeah.
And it's even better that it's offered for free. So really anybody who's interested in music or somebody who wants to teach somebody else can have the tools to do that.
That's right. And even beyond our educational outreach, which is huge right now online, just even in general, our social presence, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. Like we've always been active, but right now we are more active than ever. We are opening the vaults every week and sharing with just fans all over the world exclusive content. We're debuting new content. We've been hosting even like virtual events with Rock Hall, with artists, performers, folks behind the scenes, so we can still share some of those stories, just albeit in a virtual sense. And I think you'll see a lot more of those kind of virtual events coming up, even in the near future.
Okay, that's really awesome. Another thing that I really liked about the website is that it kind of offers a virtual tour of the exhibits. And I know that the Rock Hall, gets their temporary exhibits like the Play It Loud one, which can be seen right now. How are those types of exhibits chosen?
Yeah, so we, I mean, certainly there's committees and there's a lot of folks who help with those decisions, but ultimately we have a great team in our they're called curators. So it's our curatorial and collections department, and they have the amazing task and responsibility of acquiring artifacts, preserving them, and then putting them on display, but also thinking about what is the story we're trying to tell. And they work with our educators. They work with, kind of the thing about what's the interpretation of a particular exhibit. The exhibit, it's been said all along, which I keep going back to because it's that important, but obviously we've always had a sense of social justice in this museum. You would see that in different exhibits, but it's been a while since we had an exhibit specifically about it. And with everything that's been happening, in America, and in the world, quite frankly, it seemed like there's never a better time than now to get that exhibit up. And it's actually the first exhibit you see when you walk into the museum. Other exhibits, like, it just kind of depends on, what different themes we're thinking about. Obviously, every year we have an exhibit that celebrates the new inductees. So just a few weeks ago, we opened up our 2020 inductee exhibit, and that honors a Notorious B.I.G., the Doobie Brothers, Whitney Houston, T-Rex, Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails. It's a really great class. And that's brand new. It just opened up. You can see that if you come to the museum. But even if you can't, you can experience a lot of the new class through our digital channels as well.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. And so, for people that do go to the museum, what do you think would be like the most popular exhibit right now?
I would probably say there's probably three. You mentioned Play It Loud. I'm actually rocking the Play It Loud shirt as we speak right now.
Cool.
It's called Instruments of Rock and Roll, and it's really it's a collection of some of the most iconic instruments from some of the most notable musicians ever. Jerry Lee Lewis, Keith Richards, Chuck Berry, George Harrison of the Beatles, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, Joan Jett. I mean, and it's like this collection of instruments have never been on display together at once. So that's some great stories in that. And that exhibit's open through the rest of this year. The new inductee exhibit, which just opened up, that's great because you get to see an art installation that kind of recreates a Nine Inch Nails performance at Woodstock '94 when they were just like doused in mud because of a huge rainstorm. But that was like an iconic moment in rock and roll history, and it's recreated for everybody to see in our museum. You get to see the synthesizers used by Depeche Mode and the Doobie Brothers. You get to see, the fashion sense, the outfits that Biggie Smalls would wear, which was such an important part of his persona and of hip hop in general, but certainly of Notorious B.I.G. So there's some great stuff on display there. And as I mentioned, our it's been said all along, music and social justice, everything from the staple singers to Nina Simone to Tupac to Kendrick Lamar to Anderson .Paak, and you see artifacts, you see visuals, you see words, and it's a very powerful experience. And we hope it elicits even a little bit of discomfort, because that means that, you know, that means actually we're doing something right. It should be pushing the envelope and making you think, like, to kind of reflect back, maybe even on your own privilege of, wow, I never thought about how this could impact people. Why is that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's really awesome too. So it seems like you guys get a lot of artifacts in the museum. What do you think is the strangest artifact that you guys have?
Some of my favorite artifacts on display. I mean, we have some amazing Beatles stuff. Our Beatles exhibit is just, it's incredible. I mean, I think outside of Liverpool, it's the biggest collection, which is where the Beatles are from. It's the biggest collection of Beatles artifacts in the entire world. Stuff from Paul McCartney and John Lennon, and outfits and instruments, you know, like the you know, some of the keyboards used by the Beatles to write some of their most famous songs. So the Beatles exhibit as a whole is probably my favorite exhibit.
Yeah, that does seem really cool, especially since, like, at least in my opinion, I think that they were definitely one of the most influential bands to come out of their time and even still inspire musicians today.
Yeah, you know, they're like up there with my top 2 or 3 favorite bands ever. And the Beatles, I mean, you look at their music from 62, 63, 64 to 68, 69, 70, and that's a pretty short time when you think about it, right? But how much their music evolved and how much kind of the world in you know, in society evolved during that time. It's pretty remarkable. And to me, I mean, I can't even pick a favorite Beatles song because there's so many great ones.
Yeah, I agree with that. I honestly couldn't think of anything off the top of my head. But, you know, with the artifacts that you do get, do you guys bid on that stuff, or is most of that donated?
Yeah, so we are a nonprofit museum. So the bulk of our collection is on loan, which essentially means it's donated. Some of it is like part of our permanent collection, which basically means it's been permanently loaned out to us. A lot of them are kind of on these, you know, long-term contracts, you know, agreements that you just sort of re-up every, you know, once that loan begins to expire, we'll just re-up. We do own a small number of our artifacts, and that number is growing year over year, but it's still by far, you know, kind of the smallest part of our general collection. And that's pretty common with most nonprofit institutions. We rely on donations, on gifts, and our, you know, artifacts out on loan.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. Now, kind of going back to how you guys interact with people, especially during, you know, these pandemic times, you know, since the Rock Hall is mainly situated in Cleveland, Ohio, you know, what are some other ways that you guys engage with your local major markets like Chicago or New York?
Yeah, I mean, you know, certainly that, you know, we call it like our drive markets. People are still traveling from Illinois and Indiana and in New York and Michigan to come visit the Rock Hall. Less so than previously, but they're still coming. I think, you know, when things were, you know, when we weren't in a pandemic, we were kind of a natural destination. Again, we're the only Rock Hall in the entire world. So if you think of Cleveland and you maybe live in Chicago, you're probably thinking about us. You know, maybe you think about Cedar Point or some other kind of destinations, but you think about, you know, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think right now it's a lot of it's just about those digital engagements that I keep talking about. Like, I think that's the way where you can keep people connected with who we are, with what we celebrate, with why we celebrate it, and with the stories. We would love to still be welcoming 500,000 people a year, but we can't right now. So the alternative is to make sure we can still find ways to engage as many people as possible, and not just, you know, with, you know, the occasional tweet, or like with real, like, meaningful content that are you know, telling important stories. And that's, I think, what you'll see. Even a few weeks ago, we had Chuck D from Public Enemy and Be Real from Cypress Hill, but they're in a group right now called Prophets of Rage with Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine. They've been very active, kind of in the, and especially in the kind of, support of the Democratic Party in recent years, and really also in protest of any kind of injustices. So they actually took over our Instagram a few weeks ago. And for a couple of hours, they hosted a whole live discussion. They were interacting with fans. And that's also important too, because in that moment, we are essentially yielding our voice to other voices, which is vital, right? If, we obviously should be our own voice. We need to make sure we have an important role, an important responsibility in that sense. But we shouldn't be the only voice reaching our audiences. So I hope we see more of those kind of Instagram, Twitter takeovers, where we can also have different viewpoints, different voices taking over and sharing with our huge worldwide fan base.
That's really awesome that, all of these musicians still kind of get to interact with your fans, not only through their social media, but through your social media as well, which kind of leads me to a broad question. How is your organization recognized as the official Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
I think we are the only one that requires, and I think we fulfill this promise, credibility, accuracy, like telling the real story. There's a lot of different stories that could be told about rock and roll music. And I alluded to them earlier. There's the classic rock story, which is an important story, but that's just one slice of it. And I think had we been just like that classic rock Hall of Fame, man, you'd be missing out on so much important, beautiful music. So I think for me, it's holding up the promise of our mission, and that we have an unwavering belief in telling the true history of rock and roll with real information, with real facts, with real stories about real people.
Yeah, I think that the Rock Hall is definitely essential to people who want to learn more about the history, depending, on every kind of genre of music that there is, not just classic rock, like you were saying.
Yeah, and you can't just say you're the authority and you become the authority. Some people may disagree with that, but for me and for us, you earn it, you prove it, and you have to continue to earn and prove it. So it's we have, as the only of us in the entire world, there is a huge magnifying glass on us, and we love that. We love having to us, that's a privilege. That is a privilege to make sure we tell the story right. As I'm talking to you about what we do every day, that I'm telling you an accurate story of what happens in this museum and why this museum matters, and why these stories that we celebrate, why they matter.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for teaching us more about the Rock Hall.
Yeah.
Thank you for being generous with your time. On a more personal note, what are the chances of Peter Frampton being nominated?
Peter Frampton's amazing, and Frampton Comes Alive is one of the most, I think, influential kind of records, especially from the 70s, best-selling record, and developed a huge fan base. Again, I guess what I'll say to that is there's always a chance. I think his name gets brought up a lot. I can't say if that's gonna be something that you'll see in the ballot in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. And sometimes you may just kind of luck out where all of a sudden Frampton, his influence gets magnified again. Maybe there's a documentary or a biopic about his life, and all of a sudden people are thinking, oh, who's this Peter Frampton guy? We got to learn more about him. But are you a big fan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've met him twice, and he's like one
Wow.
of the most positive people that I've ever met.
I've heard that, and that's something that I've even learned too, is this whole legend about how rock stars are just these mean egotistical people. Yeah, there's some of them, but honestly, the vast majority of those I've worked with, and I've had a great privilege of working with so many, they're fans too. They love music. They love being here. They are honored to be celebrated in this museum. And those who aren't, are honored to even be even a part of the conversation among those who are. So, yeah, Peter Frampton's great. Hopefully one day he'll get in. But until then, I always say too, like, even if the artist isn't inducted, doesn't mean that they aren't important. And certainly maybe in your case aren't super important to your rock and roll story. And there's a lot of musicians, I grew up in the 90s. I'm a big Smashing Pumpkins fan, a big Stone Temple Pilots fan, Alice in Chains, Snoop Dogg. I mean, this was like the soundtrack of my childhood. Now, those artists, some may get in, some may never, but that doesn't diminish, in my mind, their importance for me. But I think, it's hard to separate those things sometimes and take them as like a personal attack because they're not inducted. But to me, I think it's good to see the differences, to recognize, wow, really, Stone Temple Pilots, huge influence for me as a kid. They may not get inducted, but that doesn't take away from my own personal experience with their music.
That's true. I think that, all musicians are all equally important because they bring a lot of people so much happiness for, a long time.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. Thanks again, John. I'm really glad that we got to talk today.
Ashley, you were great. I think you have a career here in future, hosting interviews, radios. You're obviously a natural.
Thank you.
I guess I will leave it by saying, because I think most of your audience is a college age audience. If any of you are coming to Cleveland and you want to visit the Rock Hall, we do have college discounts so that it can save on your admission. And more importantly, we have a great internship program. I myself am a former college intern at the Rock Hall when I was 20, 21 years old. And it kind of created the foundation of my Rock Hall experience. So apply in rockhall.com for internships. We also, if you are a performer out there, we are already taking applications for our 2021 Resident Rocker program. This is a performer kind of mentorship program where you get to learn kind of the insides of the music industry, get to, develop your craft as a performer and get to perform, on stage here at the Rock Hall all summer long. So that's, we are taking applications now for next summer. But again, a lot of great ways to be connected with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Awesome. Thank you so much.